Day 4 was where this whole thing stopped feeling like a simple experiment. Not because I was starving, not because I was tired, but because something shifted in a way I didn't expect and I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I decided to test something people have been talking about a lot lately, this idea of fibermaxxing. For the next 7 days, I was going to build my meals around one goal: increase my fiber intake in a simple, realistic way and see what actually happens. No extreme dieting, no complicated rules, just real food, real days, and real results. And I was paying attention to 3 things: my hunger, my energy, and how my body responded overall. Because if this trend actually works, those are the things that should change first. Now, before I started, I had one honest question in my mind. If fiber is so important, why do most people still feel hungry all the time? Why do so many meals feel like they barely hold you? And why does it feel like you're always thinking about your next snack, even when you just ate? That's what I wanted to find out. So I kept everything else as normal as possible. Same routine, same schedule. And only focused on improving the quality of my meals by increasing fiber through simple foods. Things like oats, fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains, nothing fancy. But here's the part people don't really talk about. When you actually try to do this, it's not as automatic as it sounds. Day 1 felt easy, almost too easy. I built my meals with more whole foods, made sure there was something solid in each plate, and went about my day. And at first, it felt like nothing really changed, which is exactly what makes most people quit early, because when something doesn't feel dramatic, you assume it's not working. But that assumption is where most people get it wrong. Day 2 was where things started to become more noticeable. Not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, almost annoying way. I started realizing how often I would normally reach for food without even thinking. Not because I was truly hungry, but because it was just routine, a habit, something I'd always done. And now that my meals were more filling, that habit started to stand out more. It was like my body was saying, "You don't actually need this right now." But my brain hadn't caught up yet. That disconnect was interesting, because it made me realize that hunger isn't always what we think it is. Sometimes it's just timing. Sometimes it's boredom. Sometimes it's just being used to eating a certain way. And once you start noticing that, it changes how you approach food completely. By day 3, things got a bit more real. Not harder, but more uncomfortable. This is usually the phase where people mess things up. Because they go from barely paying attention to what they eat to suddenly trying to overhaul everything overnight. And that rarely works. So instead of forcing it, I kept things simple. I didn't try to perfect every meal. I just focused on making better choices consistently. Adding more fiber-rich foods, eating a bit slower, drinking more water, and letting my body adjust instead of pushing it too fast. That made a huge difference, because instead of fighting the process, I was actually working with it, and then came day 4. This was the turning point, not because something dramatic happened overnight, but because I finally noticed a pattern that changed how I saw the entire experiment. Up until that point, I was still thinking about fiber as something I was adding. Something extra. But on day 4, it stopped feeling like an addition and started feeling like a foundation. My meals felt more complete, more stable, and for the first time, I wasn't constantly thinking about what I was going to eat next. That was new, because normally there's always that background noise, that low-level urge to snack, to check the fridge, to grab something just in case. But now it was quieter, not gone completely, but noticeably reduced. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just about eating more fiber. It was about building meals that actually do their job. Meals that don't leave you hanging an hour later. Meals that don't spike your hunger and then drop it again. Meals that give you a sense of control instead of constant craving. That realization alone made the whole experiment worth it, because it shifted the focus away from how much am I eating to how well is this meal actually working. And once you start thinking that way, everything changes. By this point, I also started noticing something else. Energy. Not in the sense of feeling suddenly hyper or energized, but more like steady, less up and down, less of that midday drop where you feel like you need something quick to get through the next few hours. It wasn't dramatic, but it was consistent, and consistency is what matters. Because most people aren't looking for a temporary fix. They're looking for something that actually lasts throughout the day. Now, here's the part I didn't expect. The challenge wasn't about adding more food. It was about changing the structure of what I was already eating. And that's a big difference, because when you think you need to add more, it feels overwhelming. But when you realize you just need to build better, it becomes manageable. That's what made this experiment feel realistic. Not perfect, not extreme, just better. And honestly, that's where most people underestimate this whole idea. They think it's about doing something drastic, when in reality, it's about doing something consistent enough that your body can actually respond to it. And by day 4, I could feel that response starting. Not in a flashy way, but in a way that made me pay attention. Which made me curious about what the rest of the week would reveal. Because if things were already shifting this early, what would happen by day 7? That's where things started to get even more interesting. By day 5, I stopped thinking about this as an experiment and started treating it like a normal way of eating. That shift matters more than people think, because when something feels temporary, you don't fully commit to it. You're just trying it out. You're waiting to see if it works before you take it seriously. But when it starts to feel normal, your behavior changes without you forcing it. That's what happened here. I wasn't overthinking every meal anymore. I wasn't checking boxes in my head. I was just naturally building meals that felt more complete, without needing to remind myself why, and that's when the biggest benefits started to show up clearly. Hunger became predictable. Not gone, not suppressed, just predictable. I knew when I'd actually be hungry and when I wouldn't. There was no guessing, no random cravings popping up out of nowhere, and that alone makes a huge difference in how your day feels, because when your hunger is unpredictable, your decisions become reactive. You grab whatever is convenient, you eat whatever is available, you stop thinking long-term. But when it's predictable, you feel more in control. You're not constantly negotiating with yourself about food. You just move through the day. That was probably the most underrated change. Not the physical side, but the mental quiet. That constant background noise around food started fading, and I didn't realize how loud it had been until it got quieter. By day 6, something else became obvious. This wasn't about eating more. It was about eating smarter. Because technically, I wasn't always eating more volume than before, but what I was eating was doing more for me. Holding me longer, keeping things steady, making each meal feel like it actually counted. And that's where most people go wrong. They focus on how much they're eating, instead of what that food is actually doing once they eat it. Because not all meals are equal. Some meals keep you full. Some meals keep you thinking about your next meal. And if you keep choosing the second type, it doesn't matter how disciplined you are. You're always going to feel like you're fighting yourself. That's exhausting. This experiment showed me that you don't always need more discipline. Sometimes you just need better structure. And once that structure is in place, everything else becomes easier. By day 7, I wasn't looking for some dramatic transformation. I wasn't expecting to wake up and feel like a completely different person. But I did want to understand one thing clearly. Did this actually make a difference? And the answer is yes. But not in the way most people expect. It didn't feel extreme. It didn't feel like a before and after moment. It felt like a shift. A noticeable, practical shift in how I experienced my day. Meals felt more satisfying. Hunger felt more controlled. Energy felt more stable. And most importantly, food stopped feeling like something I had to constantly manage. It just worked better. Now, here's the part that needs to be said clearly. This only worked because I didn't rush it. I didn't go from 0 to extreme overnight. I didn't try to force perfect meals every single time. I kept it simple. I let my body adjust, and I focused on consistency instead of intensity. Because when people try something like this and say it didn't work, it's usually because they tried to do too much, too fast. They overload everything. They expect instant results, and when their body pushes back, they quit. But your body isn't designed to respond well to extremes. It responds to patterns, to consistency, to gradual changes that it can actually adapt to. That's what made this work. Not the trend itself, not the name fibermaxxing. Just the simple act of building better meals, consistently, over a short period of time. And once you experience that shift, you start to see food differently. Not as something to restrict, not as something to obsess over, but as something that either works for you or works against you. And the difference between those two is usually smaller than people think. It's not about completely changing your life overnight. It's about making enough small changes that your body starts responding differently. That's the real takeaway. So if you're wondering whether this trend is worth trying, the answer isn't yes or no. The answer is how you approach it. If you treat it like a quick fix, it won't work. If you treat it like a small upgrade to what you're already doing, it just might. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to follow trends. It's to find what actually works in real life. And for me, this worked in a way that felt simple, repeatable, and realistic, which is exactly what most people are looking for, even if they don't realize it yet. And the interesting part is, this wasn't the only habit I've been testing, because once you see how much one small change can shift your day, it makes you wonder what would happen if you applied that same approach to something else, something just as simple, but just as overlooked. And that's exactly what I'm testing next. Thanks for watching True Health Tales. If this helped you, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next truth.